So you won't be able to see my face, but know that I'm smiling because I'm excited. We're going to do a little bit of filler right now because people are joining us. So it's going to take about 10 seconds or so for everyone to hop on. I'm watching the participants grow and grow and grow, which is amazing to watch. This is actually one of my most viewed events lately. So this is exciting. You are all here. As you know, that later on you'll be able to ask questions. So if you want to start thinking about those right now, that's a great thing to do while we are waiting for more people to join. All right, let's give it a couple more seconds just to let everyone in. I don't like it when we cut it off. All right, it looks like we're all here. Okay. Thank you all for coming to PMP Live tonight. My name is Hannah. I do classes here at Politics and Prose, and I, at one point in time, was also a bookseller on the children and teens floor. So if you recognize me, that's probably why. Tonight, we are doing an amazing panel with 4 different people, along with the editor of an amazing book called Ways of Hearing. This book reflects on different ways where music has really influenced the thinkers and the makers in today's society and how it has impacted their lives and their work. So for today, our panel includes Jane Hirshfield, and her latest book is Ledger. It was published in 2020. Fun fact, a couple different people in this panel created work that started right at the beginning of the pandemic. So if you want to look back and see what you might have missed in the chaos of that beginning part of the year, that's a great idea. So that book is Ledger, and she is also an ambassador for so many different things, but her work is all focused on ecological studies. And well, she's a poet as well. Okay, Elaine Pagels. And she is an amazing professor that is over actually a couple different universities. But anyway, she studies religion, and her newest book is Why Religion? And it is an amazing book that makes religion accessible and relevant to all the readers who have been reading it, especially by the reviews. That's what they say. Alrighty. Abigail Washburn is a folk musician. She lives in Nashville. Recently, she and Weifu, who is Wu Fei. Wu Fei. Did that wrong. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Just came out with an album, a record really last year, also in 2020. So if you want to go back and look at it, it's going to be Folkway. It's part of the Smithsonian's work. And so it's really well done. You should go look at it. Next up is Wu Fei, and she is a world's foremost master of, and I didn't get to ask this, so I'm going to say it wrong, and she will correct me. Jusheng? See, that is how you say that. It is a 21-string Chinese zither, and she has transformed basically classical music into something that is genre bending, which is really amazing. And then Scott Birmingham is going to be over this panel, and he is a distinguished professor of music, and he is actually recently retired from Princeton University. So I'd just like to say thank you for all coming. If you have any questions, as per always, you all know, put it in the Q&A box at the bottom, and then we'll be able to hit that. Scott will hit that at the end section and last about 15 minutes. And then also, if you have anything to say in the chat, you can always put it there. I don't know if we'll be able to hit that as often this time, just because we have so many good voices. But if you want to put something over there, go for it. I think that's all for me. So Scott, it's off to you.
Wow, thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. I'm so excited to be launching Ways of Hearing in the company of these 4 remarkable women. I'm feeling lots of gratitude for them, and would also like to thank Princeton University Concerts, the organization that has supported the creation of this book from the beginning. Thanks as well to Princeton University Press, who published the book and helped organize this very event. And of course, many thanks indeed to the one and only Politics and Prose. Above all, I want to acknowledge the co-editors of Ways of Hearing, namely Marna Seltzer, who is the Artistic and Administrative Director of Princeton University Concerts, and Dorothea von Moltke, who is the co-owner of Labyrinth Books in Princeton. Their creative vision was what made this book what it is. And what a book this is. Ways of Hearing embraces all manner of music through the voices of amazing musicians, poets, writers, critics, scholars, and remarkable people from yet other walks of life, such as visual art, science, architecture, and even the Supreme Court. We asked each of these folks to write about their relationship to a specific piece of music or to some other aspect of music. Their deeply probing and invariably personal accounts testify in extraordinary ways to music's gift of finding our deepest and truest selves. So tonight's participants really represent the bracing variety in our book. For we welcome tonight a scholar of religion reacting to the music of Beethoven, a poet reacting to the music of Olivier Messiaen, and a pair of musicians who together have created a one-of-a-kind duo that merges folk music from two quite disparate cultures. So as a way of reenacting the fundamental challenge of Ways of Hearing, I'm going to play a brief musical excerpt to introduce each of our authors. They will then react to the music. And after they all speak individually, they will interact with each other, and then we'll open the floor to all of you. So let's begin with Elaine Pagels, professor of religion at Princeton University, who engages with a movement from a late Beethoven string quartet. The movement is known as the Heiliger Dankgesang, or Holy Song of Thanks. Here's an excerpt from that music. Listen how it moves from a hymn-like aura to something with a very different energy. So, Elaine.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be in the company of these musicians and poets and you, Scott, who've brought so much music to all of us. And to talk about, I love so many kinds of music. I'm sure all of us do. But when you ask about something that really was the closest to the heart, it was this one. And the first time I heard it, I'll just mention for a minute. I was coming down from a dirt trail in a mountain in Colorado, hiking all day and just walked into the music tent and never had heard this music before, but the Juilliard String Quartet was playing this Beethoven music. And it felt like a dance when it came from this slow adagio movement, almost like a hymn-like movement, and suddenly it burst into a dance and glorious. I mean, it seemed light and absolutely exquisite, and I just loved it. Later, I was lucky enough to find out that the musician who had played it, Robert Mann, lived 3 houses away from my husband and myself in New York. And we became friends. And I said, do you remember that day they played concerts. The Juilliard played all the time. Do you remember that day when you played that? He said, yes, the Holy Song of Thanks for Healing in Times of Illness. And he said he just had an injury to his bowing arm and he was playing it, bursting into joy. that's how I first heard it. And it made me aware of how many ways you can hear the same music, because years later, I was dealing with the most, I'd say, unutterable grief of my life. There's no words for things like that. The death of our only child, age 6. And Bobby Mann and his quartet actually offered to come and play at a service for him. I dimly remember it was the Adagio from a Schubert quintet. But when months later, we were at their apartment, sitting on the floor while the quartet in that house, that apartment in New York, took the place of the dining room table. Forget the dining room table. There was a room for the quartet to play, and their friends came and sat everywhere in the room, packed in. We were considered youngsters, so we sat on the floor. And they knew all about our lives, and they knew about our child whose birth they had welcomed, whose death they had grieved with us. And they started to play this again. And this time I just felt I could see our 6-year-old son on his little red bicycle, sort of roaring down the hills of Central Park in total joy. And I was looking at something Pico Iyer wrote in this book. He talks about joy and sorrow. That music spoke so deeply. And later, I had to listen to that music over and over because of the deep complexity it allows in times of joy and sorrow and grief and every other kind of emotion. It was more complex than words could express. So I'll leave it with that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much. There's nothing quite like late Beethoven. And as you discovered, and for more than just the usual notion of the enigmatic late quartets and the epitome of artistic lateness, here you've taken late Beethoven on a journey with you through, as you say, the most sorrowful thing anyone could imagine, as well as some joys. Thank you, Elaine. Our next author is the poet Jane Hirshfield, who chose to react to Olivier Messiaen's Quartet for the End of Time. So here is the opening of the last movement. There's 8 movements in Messiaen's Quartet for the End of Time. This is the opening of the last, and it features piano and violin. So, Jane.
Well, thank you. It's a great honor to be joining this conversation and to be part of this extraordinary book. Every piece in it is stunning and moving and informative and human. So that beautiful piece of music was written, as most of you probably know, by Olivier Messiaen, while he was being held in a German prisoner of war camp during World War II. And I chose it out of, all the pieces in this book were commissioned, and my muse doesn't usually take commissions. And so it was hard for me. And as I weighed what to write about, I thought one of the possibilities was Beethoven's late quartets. One of the possibilities, these are all pieces of music I've had a profound experience with in my life. One was Miles Davis, his album Kind of Blue. The Afro-Cuban musician, Omar Sosa, the Grateful Dead. But Messiaen stepped forward for me, first of all, because of its power and beauty found in the direst of circumstances. And the way that art can so often find for us in moments when we have no agency and are plunged into despair. Art reminds us that its beauty and grief and wholeness and fracturedness and bringing together of every aspect of our lives and hearts allows us to realize that we are not completely stripped of the human, that the world can be transformed. It also stepped forward to me as the piece to respond to in a as yet unwritten poem, because I realized I didn't need to write about it. I could write with it. I could look with it at our own current direst of circumstances, a different kind of end of time, the crisis of biosphere and of climate. And our fellow beings diminishing all around us daily, that echoes the way over the course of the quartet, some of the instruments also vanish. I'm going to read you the poem, but I wanted to say one more thing before I do, which is that it is written in a traditional Urdu poetic form, which I would probably slightly mispronounce, the ghazal. And the ghazal is traditionally in long-lined couplets with a repeating word at the end of each couplet and rhymes and a great deal of form. Mine is a loose Americanized ghazal. So the recurring word is open, but sometimes you will only hear words that roughly or fully rhyme with open. Also traditional to the form, the poet's name usually appears in the last stanza. And as I wrote it, all of our name, a name for us and how we are behaving in the world, appears in the last stanza. And I want to apologize. This is the darkest poem I have ever written. Ghazal for the end of time. Break anything, a window, a pie crust, a glacier. It will break open. A voice cannot speak, cannot sing without lips, teeth, lamina propria coming open. Some breakage can barely be named, hardly be spoken. Rains stopped, Ruth said. Fires, forests, cities, cellars peeled open. Tears stopped, eyes said. An unhearable music fell instead from them, a clarinet stripped of its breathing, the cello abandoned. The violin grieving, a hand too long empty held open. The imperial piano, its 89th, 90th, 91st strings, unsummoned, unwoken. Watching, listening was like that, the low, wordless humming of being unwoven. Fish vanished, bees vanished, bats whitened, Arctic ice opened. Hands wanted more time, hands thought we had time, spending time's rivers, its meadows, its mountains, its instruments tuning their silence, its deep mantle broken. Earth stumbled within and outside us. Orca, thistle, kestrel withheld their instruction. Rock said, burning ones, pry your own blindness open. Death said, now I too am orphan.
Wow. I'm so glad you read that. And I was intrigued by what you said, that you were writing it not in response to Messiaen, but with Messiaen in our own sort of end times, vision of end times. Oh, wow. So glad you did Messiaen, and wow, thank you. So coming up is a potent sample of the music of Abigail Washburn and Wu Fei, performing their version of the folk songs The Water is Wide and the Wusuli Boat Song. Sorry, I probably mispronounced that. Wusuli. Anyway, here comes Abigail and Fei. Oh, wonderful. So, Abigail and Fei.
What an incredible honor to get to be here with Jane and Elaine and Scott, and here with my sister, Fei. Not literal sister, biological, but through space and time, we found each other. And Fei and I wrote that song sitting on my porch here in Nashville, Tennessee on a late summer day. And we both had our little babies, and we were trying to figure out a way to get them to sleep more and often because we were tired. And we were sharing with each other lullabies that worked from our separate traditions, music traditions of folk music that we love and are familiar with and steeped in from our own countries. And as I started to sing The Water is Wide, Fei heard a song in her mind, and we started seeing if we could find the right key and the right way rhythmically to sing together so that they would find each other at the end of the lines, or at least at the end of the stanza. And indeed, it is quite effective at putting babies to sleep. So any parents out there, give it a try. Yeah. Fei had recently moved to America from China. And yeah, go ahead, Fei.
I also want to say thank you for having me, and this is a great honor to be part of it. So me and my husband, our two little kids, moved to Nashville from Beijing in 2015. So our kids were really small. So like what Abby said, that lullabies is so universal. I mean, just like music, but as a very tired mothers, we had to sort of source something that also cheer ourselves up. So put our babies to sleep at the same time. And magically, these two folk songs from the opposite sides of the planet, magically, we didn't really change much at all. It was our perfect range for our voices, which is very important for singers. And the keys just weaved perfectly with each other, even the phrasing. phrases. Sometimes, sometimes can be a little too long or too short to have to kind of sort of cut it a little bit, but this just I guess, babies are universal. When they hear a rhyme, they hear a rhythm, sound wave, that's what put them to sleep. So I guess the mothers from our past times in history, that's always been working, and to this day. So and with our strings, also strings, like also what Elaine and James, the music that had a lot of strings and sort of like ripples. I think that has a lot of beautiful sound wave and tones when we put them together.
But Faye and I met probably in 2007, or do you remember, Faye?
2006, yeah.
2006 in Colorado, through the introduction of from a friend. And we've kept visiting each other in different places we lived, in New York City, Beijing, Nashville. And the music, Faye's an incredible composer as well, and also an avant-garde instrumentalist and singer, but also deeply steeped in the folk music of China, including all the different ethnicities there. And I've been studying and learning from elders and from recordings and from friends in the Appalachian music world for a couple decades now. And so we both, when we met each other, that was our common ground, was this folk music that we love so much. And that music is, it's just so old, you really can't even date it. Like the Water is Wide that I was singing is claimed by both the Scottish and the Irish music traditions. And there are broadsheet music of The Water is Wide in Scotland dating back to the 1600s, and who knows how far back before that certain parts of the song have been carried down from. And I know, Faye, Woosuli boat song is hard to date, isn't it?
Yes, Woosuli boat song. Woosuli actually is the Woosuli River that runs between China to Russia, and half of it is in the border of China and half is in Russia. So it's a folk song from the He people who has been living on the Woosuli riverbank for who knows, also centuries. And there's like a very small number of them. They're total probably about 30,000 He people, half in China, half in Russia. And so they, this is one of their folk songs. And when I did research, I wanted to learn what really happened to this song. Therefore, I learned that this one was particularly that we could improvise the words, because it's a folk song for He people when they go fishing, when they are cooking, and therefore you're supposed to improvise the words to help you with life, with what's going on at the moment. And He people, even back about 80 years ago, they were still wearing fish skin. So there were actual why it's called boat song. They live on the boat, and their traditional clothing was made out of fish skin. And that's how much their life was associated with the river life. And at the time, actually, there was singer-songwriter in the late 40s and early 50s, went to that region to do field recording. However, there was no notation, and He people didn't have written language. They had a spoken language. Therefore, the lyrics had been changed. However, I couldn't find the original lyrics because there was no written form. And then, fortunately, this type of folk song from He tradition is to improvise. So therefore, when Abby and I were trying to put our babies to sleep, I imagined that a mother on the boat rocking her baby to sleep while fishing to provide food. So that was the whole spirit. And so it's so beautiful. It's a very loved song in all over China since my parents were young. Probably it's known by at least 1 billion Chinese people over there. This one.
I think that singing about water together from the two traditions feels so comforting, because it's like it's like the way everything moves is like water, and
one big body.
And it all leads to one big body, though it comes from all these smaller sources. And I think that's comforting to babies when they hear it too.
Yes.
That's a beautiful thought about water, and I'm remembering that also appears in your joint essay in the book about, I think, folk traditions that move like water towards towards something universal. Wow. Well, it's obvious that the two of you are bringing together so many things: Beijing and Nashville, and the ancient banjo and ancient guzheng, and also these folk traditions. And sort of stepping back and thinking about all four of you for a moment, it's clear that you all inhabit such different musical worlds in the context of the book Ways of Hearing. And yet there are powerfully resonant human themes that you and your musics share, such that I imagine that you might have comments and questions for each other. And I wanted to make sure that we as a group had some time to bat it around a little bit before I start taking account of some of the questions that are coming in from our audience. So does anyone want to ask something of one of our friends here?
I would love to just say something quickly. The range in the book is wonderful. And as Jane said, none of us listen to one kind of music. There's so many kinds. And she brought Messiaen into it, which was extraordinary. This song you sang together was glorious. And there were two things that you wrote that really struck me. And I wanted to ask you to maybe speak to them if you choose. One of them was to talk about what music could do. And I thought about, in the context of religious traditions, you think of chanting, drumming, in ceremonies, in healing ceremonies, in worship, chorus music, choral music. I mean, how music opens people to very different dimensions of experience. And the second one that I loved was when you said, we don't have to sound similar to harmonize, not at all. That was, anyway, I just love those.
That feels good to hear you point those out. I think Faye and I pretty quickly connected in spirit and decided that we were going to make music together. And I think that's as much a piece of, it is the reason it's been created. A lot of people say, how can you combine the two traditions? And for us, it was just, we wanted to.
Yeah, and another very, I would say unique or very special, precious experience working with Abby is that when we, throughout our collaboration, we weren't really thinking about, okay, what song and what key or what rhythmic pattern. And then it was because these are folk songs, and we started thinking, okay, so what workers were like construction workers would sing that helped them to, pound their hammers. And so there are railroad workers in the US, and there was boat pulling workers on the Yangtze River so they must experience the same kind of physical emotion and exhaustion, but what could help them? And then we started, and then Abby knows a lot of the songs from America, and I know a lot of the songs from there. And then they just magically, it's not even magic, it's just human need to have that sound to help them to, and then it's really, and then, help you to get the work done quick. And then it sounds really cool. So that was, and then, lullaby is another example. And then for a mountain song from the mountains, when the old time, when there was no cell phone, of course, when people, have their boats with them and then call out their buddies on the other side of the mountain and to see where they are. And then they communicate with, and then the echoes, they figure out the distance and the timing to find their buddies. So, and then that gradually becomes songs. And so these are all some of the actually we worked on these songs on our album as well. So it's a really beautiful way to think about just the actual life of people, where they live, maybe a old song or a mountain song or a work song, chicken farmer song. So that's yeah, that's how we feel like that's quite a easy, actually. It was quite easy, I would say.
It is extraordinary to consider the range of things that music is used for in being human, all the way from all these rituals that we're talking about to work songs. Jane, did you want to ask?
So I'd like to carry on with this conversation because I'm very interested with this conversation. I had noted down from Abby and Faye's piece a phrase very similar to what Elaine noted, which was, I had noted the phrase, the power of difference to create beauty, which is also about, we are all swimming in the waters of the hybrid here, of an American woman in the mountains of Colorado suddenly hearing Beethoven, the hybridity of your piece in the most literal sense, Abby and Faye, of bringing together these two different sounds and showing how they can co-inhabit one piece of music extraordinarily. But I'm very interested in this subject of, I've thought about it. Now, poetry's origins are in song. The word for poem in classical Chinese is the same as song. The same is true in Japanese. Lyric poetry is called lyric poetry because it was meant to be spoken to the lyre. And in thinking about the origins of poetry over the years, I have very much, come to the guess, because I don't know how anyone would actually in a scholarly way know this, but the guess is that art had to come into our lives to serve us in the moments of transition, of falling in love, of loss, of birth, death, the moments of ritual transition. So at a marriage, music is played, poetry is spoken. Also work songs, also something I sort of hated to admit, but it's perfectly true, war songs. And so what all art does, I think, is help us take experiences which are too large to be boiled down to some one-dimensional statement or some one-dimensional understanding, and bringing into our shared communal life the multiplicity of these moments, the beauty, the sorrow, the drum that gets people to row together in a boat when you need to row together, or the voice that does that, the chanting that does that. And so, it is one of the great arguments of contemporary looking at aesthetics of should art be useful? And I think that is a diminishing formulation because, of course, one of the great usefulnesses is sheer delight, which does nothing except cause a baby to laugh. But laughter is good, and delight is good, and reveling in beauty takes us out of the narrower selves, which can be caught in selfish aims and intentions. When we're singing together, we cannot be selfish, and we cannot fail to recognize that we are together. We're not solitary beings in this world. So that's my little disquisition on this subject.
That's fabulous. I wanted to pick up on something that you said about how music, well, these experiences we have that are too large to be boiled down to one thing, and how music seems to work with that. And I wanted to bounce that over to Elaine, because it seems to me that there is something about late Beethoven, in particular those string quartets, that they famously consist of contrasts that are unreconciled.
Yes. Yes, they spoke to me that way so deeply. There was a while when I couldn't listen to anything else. It was a difficult time. And what I realized I wrote was similar to what Faye and Abby had said, that Beethoven allows contrasts to emerge and remain unreconciled. It doesn't resolve, it doesn't, it's so complex. And that's, it's the time when I'm a writer, I began to really wish I could play music or write music, because the music can do so much more. I mean, poetry does the most out it can with words, most better than prose, which is what I write, more multifaceted. But music, as we've just heard, can do even more than that.
Absolutely. But speaking of what words can do, I wanted to ask Jane, boy, one thing that I get from your poem is a sort of its potent economy. There's not a wasted word. Every gesture seems invested with something like the gravity of a last word. So why did you choose, would you say, the Ghazal, or however you say it, the Ghazal form, as the vehicle for these remarkable words and thoughts?
Well, I wrote this poem not knowing it was going to be a ghazal. That stepped forward into the process of it as I realized that it was going to be a poem. Not all of my poems overtly use sound work in as audible a way of repetitions of, instruction actually rhymes with open in this poem. The rhyming is part of the engine of finding what I was going to say, as music always is. In the most free verse, plain spoken poetry, if there's no music, it's not a poem. You're not thinking in the ways of poetry. But I do think that the goal of poetry is to return to the reader, listener, or for that matter, writer, for every moment of attention that's requested. You should return more than 1 quart in a 1 quart bottle. There should always be some extra beyond, and not to waste people's attention or time during the sacred moments of transition, during the moments of greatest need. And, a baby needing to sleep is a big crisis. This is no small thing. This is an existential moment for that baby who is wailing away and needs something brought into their attention, which allows them to feel safe in what is a very perilous world. So yeah, every word matters, and the variation of the music in poetry is much like the variation of the music in songs and quartets and symphonies. So those clipped phrases, fish vanished, birds vanished, bats whitened, Arctic ice opened, that creates its own power by taking what is basically a long syntaxed poem with longer sentences, and then saying, here is the truth. And that truth is like a percussive drum of grief in my heart. These facts of extinction and of wound in this beautiful world I was born into, and that I want your babies to grow up and be able to share.
Wow, well put. Well, I think that I want to address some of the audience questions at this point. And there's some pretty heavy duty ones. This is a fabulous audience. One question that I think would be directed mostly to Abby and Faye is, what has it been like creating and recording music during a pandemic? Have you found new pathways and perhaps a deeper appreciation for your medium?
Hey, I'd love to hear you talk about I feel like you just dove headfirst into a new project of really creating every day almost,
After the pandemic, I just started to compose music every day, and then I decided to just share a piece with the world every day. I don't know, maybe I have some kind of syndrome that I've had that since I was a kid. I can't stop doing that. And I've been doing that since I was 12 years old, is composing every day. I can't stop. And so I've been recording and composing every day. So far, I think I've released 425 compositions since May 3rd. Since basically I just decided, okay, nothing's gonna stop me. And so somehow just primarily on the guzheng, because we're so isolated as everyone, we just couldn't see each other. And we've even tried to do pandemic, I mean, Zoom sort of, there was no such app that could really, sync perfectly. It was so difficult. So I just kept going. And so that's my daily music project. So that's so far, we'll just kind of wait until it's safe enough to get back to the world again. And at the same time to really have a whole new appreciation of the collaboration that I've done in the past, that because now we physically can't be together. We're gradually resuming, however, it is still, Abby and I both have small children, and the children's vaccines are not out. So we're mothers who are really nervous. And anyway, so that's just one thing that I've been doing and enjoying.
Wow.
I've been so impressed by Faye's productivity and just pure creativity. It's been so exciting to see that. Every day I get to look for something, and there it is. It's some new piece that she's created, inspired by nature or a moment with her child or a memory. I've been so different. I haven't felt productive at all. Although my husband, Bela Fleck, and I have created a record that we'll share eventually based on our Banjo House Lockdown series that we did last year. But for my own, individual creative spirit, I felt very like I'm emptying out. And I think there's a need I have to listen and not respond right now. And in my, work, thinking about race and problems of justice and environmental and, human, and my role in it, I feel a real drive to empty, to hallow my heart and look for that time when I know I need to start emerging in a new way. So I feel very much in a process of not. So that's intentional opening and hallowing. Mm-hmm.
Wow. There's a question about space and time, which I'm almost afraid to try to get into, but having to do with music as an expression of space and time, but what we mostly hear about and have heard about tonight is time. How might space play into this? Any idea about that?
Space.
Elaine probably knows more about space-time than most of us.
No, not really. That was only a vicarious participation. Physics. No, I don't know what to say to that. It just made me think about the spaces where one hears music. And I thought of cathedrals. I thought of coffee houses and how that may affect, but that's not a grandiose idea of space.
We should actually send whoever asked that question to the final piece in the book, which is Laurie Anderson and Edgar Chueri, who I'm probably mispronouncing, sorry, Going Spatial, which is talking very directly to that question. I will just say that, for me, when I am fully engaged in a piece of music, and the way that I know I am fully engaged is it does become spatial. I am inside of something which is not linear. It is a fully embodied 360-degree, 3 or 4 dimensional experience. And that's when that happens is how I know I'm really listening. That is the way of hearing that is the happiest for me, is when I hear it as space.
Well, as Scott knows, that's what Edgar Choueiri does. He has created a way of having music in 3 dimensions. Can you say a word about it, Scott?
Well, one thing that I will say about it is that I have heard his realization of that in his living room.
Yeah.
It's absolutely amazing. You just close your eyes and you are in another space. In this case, the sort of concert hall experience, where you can feel like you're in row 3 of a string quartet concert. Or if you want, you could be on stage between a couple of the instrumentalists. But it is a fascinating collaboration that he did with Laurie Anderson in Ways of Hearing. I think that we maybe have time for one more question here. And this is an interesting one from someone who is acknowledging that music adds tremendous communicative power to poetry or to language in general. And maybe this could be directed toward Jane. If a composer wanted to set a piece of your writing to music, would you therefore be simply delighted? Would you have reservations?
Well, like most, at least most poets who I know, I get requests for this very frequently. I always say yes. I always say yes, because, you know, the poem is already written, the poem exists. And if some additional life can be brought to it because another artist wants to, and nobody knows contemporary poetry better than composers who set words to music. They all are reading all the time, you know, with great hunger, looking for the next thing. And, you know, some of the pieces have been astonishingly beautiful and transformative. It's a different work of art. When that's so. I also have learned, as a person who is extremely, I started out unable to even to give poetry readings. I just shook. I was very shy, lots of stage fright. And in recent years, there has come more and more to be the invitations to actually say the poems with musicians in a jazz improvisational kind of way. And so I've performed with the Paul Winter Consort in the amazing big chapel at Princeton. And it was transcendently fun and beautiful and an extraordinary experience. And so, yes, we're just returning to poetry, the roots that were always in it. And I simply feel very honored. The most beautiful setting I know was of a translation that I did. John Adams, in his No Oratorio, used an Englishing I had done of Sor Juana, the 16th century Mexican nun, and it's absolutely gorgeous.
Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, right?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Well,
I'd love to just add one thing. Just I've been wanting to not ask Jane, but when I read her piece, it instantly reminded me of a traditional Chinese art. It's for 2,000-3,000 years. It's always the poetry, music, and improvisation, and calligraphy and painting. They're all it's one thing. So actually, since I was a child, even though traditional art and opera or traditional zither concerts always sometimes combined with the tea ceremonies, always one thing. So I would love to see more of, like, when Jane next time, I would love to see a performance of more of on the Western classical, even with this concept. It's because it's exactly the same thing. It's how it expresses, yeah. And
Yes.
then the pauses, the phrasing, the silence before the crescendo. Yeah, it's so it's really just expressing with different kind of codes.
Yes, and of course, when I read classical Chinese poetry, very often the title of a poem is going to be written to the tune of, fishermen on the such and such river.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, goes
Yeah.
both ways.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, I really appreciate this cross-cultural communicating that we're doing. So I thank
Yes.
you all for being so open to this, open in a positive sense. That's the word from the Chazal that was so central.
It was beautiful. I'm going to hop back in here and just say thank you so much to everyone who was a part of this. Thank you to all the questions that the audience has put in. They were beautiful to read through. I understand we didn't hit all of them, but thank you for participating. And thank you to all the panelists for answering them so thoroughly. It was beautiful. Couple different things before we end. First one is if you'd like to purchase this book, it's in the chat. So if you want to go to the chat, there's a link there and you can click on that and you can purchase the book. Second thing, there was another editor who was here as part of the audience, and they would love you to know that there is actually a playlist that is part of this. So that's also in the chat right now. So if you want to click on that, then you can see all the other pieces of music that went along with the book. And so it'll give it a much fuller experience if you want to do that. So I would suggest doing that. Also, there's another link that has more information on Princeton's website. So if you want to click on that one, it'll give you more information. Last but not least, I'm going to ask our lovely panelists one last question. And that is, right now, what are different things that you are reading that would be another good launching off point for our audience? You can give one, you can give two, you can say, this question came out of thin air, so I have no idea what I'm reading and I forgot everything. Either way, do you want to start with Scott? And then we'll move down.
Sure. Well, move up, I think is what you mean, but
One way or another, we'll move across.
Wow, that's always a fun question. Hey, what I'm reading right now is a brand new novel by the Irish writer Colm Tobin. His book about Thomas Mann called The Magician.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm also reading Thomas Mann's mega book, Joseph and His Brothers. I avoided for years because it's just so imposing. But I'm told by scholars of Thomas Mann and others that this is the single greatest Thomas Mann book, and I'm a sucker for single greatest.
That's great.
Long, but it's wonderful. But Colm Tobin, I would say he's done it again.
That's great. Jane, what are you reading right now?
Okay, I will try to do three of them quickly. I'm reading through all of the books of poetry by the Polish poet Adam Zagajewski because I loved his work dearly, and he died not too long ago. I am reading George Saunders, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, which is his book about engaging with Russian short stories and the craft of life and art that come from that. I'm reading, I'm going to read Peter Godfrey Smith's Metazoa, Animal Life and the Birth of the Mind. And then I want to recommend to people a book of a very different kind, although it's absolutely beautifully written, which happened to come to me at this moment when I've had a friend in ICU for some days. She's out now, which is a great relief. But there's a new book by a doctor, Wes Eli, called Every Deep Drawn Breath. And it is about ICU and the practices of medicine, his own transformation as a human being. And I think especially in this time when so many people have been in ICUs with COVID and for many other reasons, it is an indispensably useful and encouraging book, and everybody should be familiar with it before they need it. So Every Deep Drawn Breath.
That was beautiful. As a quick side, we actually are doing a class on Adam Zagajewski, and I've never said his name before work. And but if anyone wants to take that class, we have an amazing instructor who's going to be going through the work because she was friends with him, and I'm excited.
Yes.
Okay, next up, Wolfe.
I like to recommend this book called by Paul French, a British author based in London, and he used to live in Shanghai for about 20 years. And this year he wrote a book. I loved his first book, Midnight in Peking. That was quite a few years ago. But his recent one is called just came out this year. Strangers on the Praia. Praia is a Portuguese word for beach. A Tale of Refugees and Resistance in Wartime Macau is based on true stories and new research. Paul is a historian and of Jewish refugees who moved on from wartime Shanghai to seek possible route to actually Portugal and Spain, which was two neutral countries during the Second War, and through the Portuguese colony of Macau at the time. So I was really fascinated because I didn't know, I only knew about the Jewish refugees in Shanghai for about 10 years. And then Paul wrote this book, actually quite a few went to Macau, and then just also relating to what's going on as well, a lot of the current situation over in Macau and Hong Kong. So I like to recommend this book.
Amazing. Elaine, would you like to go next?
Well, there are two books that, one that I just read recently, which I find quite extraordinary, is by an anthropologist at Stanford. Her name is Tanya Luhrmann. It's called How God Becomes Real. And it's a book about religious traditions. Tanya studies them particularly in India and Africa and the United States. And she's saying it's not about beliefs. It's about practices and certain kinds of experience that happen in emotionally charged situations. And it's a marvelous, readable, insightful, amazing book. The next one I'm looking forward to reading is by Zainab Salvi. It's called Freedom is an Inside Job. She came here from Iraq, and a very complicated situation in Iraq, and is working now to get women out of Afghanistan, which I find very moving, her energy and her determination to do that, and how she talks about the people she invites to speak in that book.
That's great. And last up is Abigail.
Yes. Okay. So I'm reading a book called Call Me Athena, A Girl from Detroit.
Yes.
And this is a young adult novel in verse. And young adult, I mean, it's for everybody. And it's actually written by one of my very best friends from growing up. And she writes it loosely about her grandmother, who was born to a Greek immigrant family in Detroit. And it's loosely based on it. So you get to hear a lot of Colby's own voice. Colby Cedar-Smith is who wrote it. And it's her own voice recalling the stories that were shared with her through her family. And it's so beautiful, a story of immigrants. And she's actually teaches poetry and writing through the Princeton Arts Council. She lives in Hopewell, New Jersey. So there's a Princeton connection there too. Really? I'm also reading Elaine Pagels' Why Religion? Oh. And I'm also reading Jane Hirshfield's Ledger. So I just wanted to share that as well.
On a side note, also, if you want to, there's Call Me Athena, and we have an event on that one. And it's amazing. I agree. Your friend is incredible. That is everything for tonight. Thank you for being here. Once again, they have amazing works that are out there. They're at Politics Pros, they're at other indie books, bookstores. Just go find it, enjoy it, revel in it. Have a beautiful, beautiful night, everyone, and good night.